talking about life under a toxic leader. It's Christmas, and I was reading the Christmas story, and as I was reading, I recognized this King Herod is a toxic leader. And I began to write down notes and saying, yeah, in this circumstance, this is what he... So I've got 10 observations about King Herod and his toxic leadership that I think speak to across the board to how toxic leaders operate. And if you're living or surviving under or suffering under a toxic leader, then maybe this will be helpful. I've got a couple other videos. You can see them in the comment section of what life can be like under a toxic leader. And it's a big deal in the Army because toxic leaders are everywhere. Well, they call them counterproductive leaders now. But I want to share the Christmas story with you. It's Christmas as I make this video. And I want to share these 10 observations about life under a toxic leader. First, yeah, you can see, where is it there? Right there. Don't split wood with your head. That's the simplest thing I could say about that. Had a fall at home. The nightstand won. I'm doing much better. Thanks for asking. But Christmas story, looking at it through the lens of life under a toxic leader, focusing on King Herod. After Jesus was born, this is Matthew chapter 2, in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born the King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. First observation is that toxic leaders are easily threatened. Jesus was a baby. Mary, Joseph were poor people. I mean, he was born in a stable, but yet somehow this helpless, innocent, poor baby ruffled the feathers of the darn king of the land. Why? Because he felt threatened. The Bible says he was disturbed. Not just him, but the whole Jerusalem was disturbed. And so when a toxic leader is threatened or disturbed, the whole office is thrown in array. And, maybe they're emotionally insecure. I mean, obviously there's this layer of insecurity that runs through, I think, a toxic leader's leadership. But there's a paranoia. Everything is like, what is going to threaten my leadership? And this is what's going on here. This little baby threatened, disturbed the leader, the king of the land. So it continues. Verse 4, when Herod called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, the religious leaders, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. And they responded, "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written." And then in verse 6, they quote an Old Testament prophecy that says, "Bethlehem in the land of Judah are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a leader who will shepherd my people Israel." And so Herod hears this prophecy, this scripture quote, and he interprets it as, how does it impact me? What does it do for me, for my leadership? And the second observation about toxic leaders, they are self-consumed. Everything is run through the filter of, how does it impact me? Every regulation, every circumstance, every person, every word that was said, every scripture that was written, how does it impact me? That's what Herod was doing here. This verse that was written hundreds of years before was interpreted through the lens of, what is it doing to my leadership, to my reign, to my little life? There's life under a toxic leader. Everything is, how is it impacting my leadership? So verse 7. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go, search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me that I too may go and worship him." So in those two verses, 3 observations, and I'll just kind of run through them. Number 1, toxic leaders use people to serve their own purposes. Emphasis on the word use. They manipulate, they use people. And Herod was manipulating and using the Magi here to serve his own ends. And a toxic leader, if you're under one, because you probably already feel like that you've been used or are being used. But they use and they manipulate people to serve their own purposes and ends. Number 4, they operate in secret. Herod did this with the Magi in secret. Didn't want his leaders, didn't want anybody to know. Shh, just between you and I. And that's how toxic leaders operate. No transparency. They lead with the door shut, and everything or all these things are done in secret so as to preserve their leadership. The fifth observation, toxic leaders misrepresent themselves. Herod said, "Oh, I want to go worship this baby. I want to, I'm a follower. I'm a worshiper. I'm a disciple." He was none of that. He was just saying that so as to manipulate the wise men. And that's how toxic leaders are. They will manipulate people or a situation by misrepresenting themselves. Yeah, I'm a compassionate leader. Yeah, I'm a hard leader. Yeah, I'm a religious man. Yeah, I'm this. They are whatever they deem it takes to get out to or to leverage a situation. And so we're moving through here. I want to jump to verse 12 because Herod sends the Magi to Jesus. The Magi visit Jesus. They have their experience with Jesus. And Herod says, "I want you to come back and brief me, on what's going on." But look at verse 12. It says, "Having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country another route." Observation number 6 is that toxic leaders give off a stench. Other leaders are aware. They just know that this is poison, that this is toxic, and they avoid that leader if they kill it, if they can. And these Magi were able to avoid Herod, not to go back, because they just did not want to get in the way or near or close to a toxic leader. Toxic leaders give off a stench, and the Magi became aware of Herod's stench. So what happens? Verse 16. Check this out. It says, "When Herod realized he'd been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time that he had learned from the Magi." So 3 observations here. Herod just goes ballistic and just goes on the warpath and kills a bunch of babies. Observation number 7, toxic leaders are impulsive. They are emotionally driven, and they make decisions out of frustration, rage, and anger. And that's what Herod does here. He was angry, he was rage, and he makes the decision to go off and kill all of these babies. Number 8, toxic leaders are vindictive. Somebody needs to pay. If they're upset, somebody needs to be upset with them. They cannot suffer alone. If I'm suffering, everybody is suffering. And that's what Herod was dealing with this. If they're going to do that to me, I'm going to make sure somebody pays for their discretion. And so many families lost sons that night because a toxic leader was being vindictive. And the 9th observation in regards to this verse here, toxic leaders overreact. Because of this one incident, multiple, I don't know how many babies and lives were ended simply because the toxic leader was impulsive, vindictive, and they overreact. It's just like, man, if like something on the scale of a 1 happened to me, I'm going to make sure something on a scale of a 10 happens to them. That's how toxic leaders operate. Finally, one last observation from verse 19, chapter 2 in the Gospel of Matthew. It says, "After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother, go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead.'" So once Herod goes, once the toxic leader leaves, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus go back. And the 10th observation is that people wait for toxic leaders to leave. They might just shut the office door and hide in their bunker, or they might leave the reservation, if you will, leave the organization, like get out of the army or get out of the church. Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, they left to go to hide. And then once the toxic leader, once Herod was gone, it was safe for them to come back. And that's what happens with a toxic leader. And so you can see from the example of Herod, life can be difficult under a toxic leader. 10 observations that I shared you there. Encourage you to go back to the scripture. You will see them. Thank you for watching. Merry Christmas. Walk in peace. Have the best day. Have the best Christmas season possible. And always, as always, stay awesome.